Okay, let's start this deep dive with a little scenario. And I'm going to be completely honest here. This is a scenario I have lived through probably about 1,000 times. And I have a very strong feeling a lot of you listening right now have too.
No, I think we all have.
Right. So paint the picture. It's 11:30 p.m. The house is completely quiet. You've had a really long day. Maybe it was a stressful day at work. Maybe the kids were screaming, or, maybe you just feel that general existential weight of the modern
The
world.
heavy stuff.
Exactly, the heavy stuff. And suddenly you find yourself in the kitchen,
Ah, yes, the witching hour.
the witching hour, and you are definitely not looking for a carrot stick. You are not in there to get a refreshing glass of water. No, you're looking for something salty or something crunchy or maybe something really sweet and fatty.
The hyper-palatable trifecta.
Yes. So you open the pantry and you grab a bag. Let's just say it's chips, Doritos, potato chips, whatever your vice is. And you tell yourself, I am just going to have a handful, just a few to take the edge off before bed.
Which are basically the famous last words of the modern human.
Honestly, yeah, because cut to 10 minutes later and you look down, you're sitting on the couch, you are dusting crumbs off your shirt, your fingers are covered in that ridiculous neon orange dust, and the bag is just, it's completely empty.
Devoured.
It wasn't a snack, it was a demolition. And in that specific moment, sitting there in the dark, what is the feeling? I can tell you it is not satisfaction.
No, it rarely is.
It's not this nice feeling of fullness.
It is shame.
It is absolute crushing shame. You look at that empty, crumpled up plastic bag and you just think to yourself, I am so weak.
Yeah,
You think, I have zero discipline. I have no willpower whatsoever. I'm a failure of a human being because I literally could not stop myself from eating an entire bag of processed corn.
it is a incredibly heavy narrative that we all carry around with us. I mean, we have completely moralized eating in our culture.
We really have.
We treat weight gain and the inability to resist these high-calorie foods as a fundamental character flaw. The implication is always that if you were just a stronger person, if you were a better person, you wouldn't have eaten the chips. That is the dominant story society tells us every single day.
And it's the exact story we tell ourselves in the mirror. But today we are taking that entire story, we're crumpling it up just like that chip bag, and we are throwing it straight in the trash.
Completely discarding it.
Because the source material we have for this deep dive today is, well, it's effectively an intervention. It's grabbing us by the shoulders, looking us dead in the eye, and saying, stop it. Don't beat yourself up. This is not a you problem. It's a primate problem.
Which is such a liberating shift in perspective, isn't it? The material we're going to unpack today is this fascinating, really rich blend of evolutionary biology, primatology, and a good dose of nutritional anthropology. And the core thesis of all these sources is radical in its absolute simplicity.
Which I love.
Right. It argues that what you are perceiving as a failure of your willpower, that late-night chip binge, is actually a massive, roaring biological success story. You are operating exactly as your evolutionary hardware was designed to operate.
Right, the hardware is fine, but the software is glitching out because we're running it in a totally wrong environment.
Precisely. We are running ancient Pleistocene-era survival software in a modern 21st century environment of absolute infinite abundance. And the results are, well, they're complicated.
To say the least. And we have a ton of ground to cover today to explain why this is happening. We are going to talk about orangutans who paint pictures.
Yes, we are.
We're going to talk about the Wall Street bankers of the animal kingdom. We're going to talk about why squirrels out in the Grand Canyon are basically having heart attacks. And of course, we're going to talk about the Ice Age.
I know it sounds like a completely disjointed list of topics, but I promise you and everyone listening, it all connects directly back to that bag of chips in your kitchen.
So our mission today is to explore the biology of the binge. We need to really dig in and understand the critical difference between what our sources call gorgers and hoarders. And honestly, on a personal level, I just really need you to validate me and tell me it is not my fault I ate all that pizza last weekend.
We will definitely get there. You'll get your validation.
Right.
But to do that, to really build this case, we have to start with the absolute star of our source material. We have to talk about pumpkin.
Ah, pumpkin. Now, I have to admit, when I first started reading through this source, I saw the name pumpkin and I immediately thought, oh, this is going to be about a house cat or maybe a really dopey golden retriever. But pumpkin is substantial.
Substantial is a good word for it. Pumpkin is an orangutan, or, well, was an orangutan. This specific story comes to us from a zoo in Atlanta a number of years back.
But before we get into the specifics of Pumpkin's whole predicament, I think we really need to set a baseline for the listener. What is an orangutan actually supposed to be? Because when I picture them, I'm thinking of King Louie from the Jungle Book, or maybe those BBC nature documentaries where they're just gracefully swinging through the rainforests over in Borneo.
And that is exactly the right image to have in your head. In their natural state, in the wild, a male orangutan is basically an elite Olympic-level athlete.
Right.
They're completely arboreal, which means they live their lives almost entirely up in the canopy of the trees. They're navigating this incredibly complex three-dimensional world, swinging from branch to branch, constantly supporting their entire body weight with just their arms.
So they have to be absolutely ripped.
They are incredibly strong, lean, muscular, and efficient. A healthy, wild male orangutan weighs in at roughly 160 pounds.
Wow.
There is not an ounce of wasted mass on them.
Yeah.
And socially, their behavior is very distinct from a lot of other primates. They are highly solitary creatures.
Kind of the lone wolves of the primate world, then.
Yes, exactly. Primatologists actually describe them as the embodiment of dignity. They have this very zen-like quality to them. They can literally just sit alone for hours up in a tree, just observing the forest, processing their environment. They aren't frantic or hyperactive. They just have this quiet, majestic, almost stoic presence.
Okay, so I want everyone listening to picture that. A 160-pound Zen master gymnast, the absolute epitome of primate grace and efficiency. Now enter Pumpkin.
Yes, Pumpkin was, well, he was very different.
Pumpkin was a captive orangutan living his life at the Atlanta Zoo. And from what the sources say, he was definitely not solitary. He sounded like a total fraternity brother.
He was a massive extrovert. The author describes him as an absolute charmer. He loved having an audience. He would come right up to the glass of his enclosure to interact with the crowds. And he was smart. I mean, incredibly, remarkably smart.
This part completely blew my mind when I read it. He was an artist.
He really was. He painted pictures. The zookeepers would provide him with blank canvases and non-toxic paints, and he would sit there and create these genuinely lovely, abstract compositions.
That is wild.
And beyond the painting, he also knew sign language. He had built up a working vocabulary of around 150 different words. So he could actually communicate his needs to the keepers. He could express specific desires. He would even make little jokes with them.
So we're dealing with a highly sophisticated, artistic, linguistic ape. He sounds like a great guy. But there was a physical problem.
A massive physical problem. While his wild cousins over in Borneo are swinging through the canopy at a very trim 160 pounds, Pumpkin was living the absolute good life in Atlanta. And because of that, Pumpkin weighed in at 500 pounds.
500 pounds. I just want to pause on that number for a second. That is more than 3 times his natural evolutionary body weight.
Yes. If you want to scale that up to human terms, imagine a person whose healthy natural weight is supposed to be 180 pounds. But instead, they weigh 540 pounds. It's not just a little extra padding. It is physically catastrophic.
The source actually has this one line that really stuck with me. It said that if wild orangutans saw him, they wouldn't even recognize him as the same species. They literally described him as looking like a, quote, big fat pup, unquote. Just this giant immobile blob of orange hair.
And we have to be clear, this wasn't just an aesthetic issue or a joke for the visitors. This was a critical medical emergency.
Right.
The zoo veterinarians and the primacologists were terrified. They were looking at Pumpkin's x-rays and realizing that the sheer physical weight of the blubber sitting on his chest was threatening to literally collapse his lungs. He was essentially suffocating under the weight of his own caloric success.
Success at eating, you mean?
Exactly. He was too good at it.
Yeah.
So the zoo staff realized they had to make a really hard call. They couldn't just let him keep eating the standard abundant zoo diet, which was clearly way too many calories for his extremely low activity level. So they intervened. They had to put Pumpkin on a diet.
And this is where the story pivots into what feels like a psychological horror film. Because, look, we have all been on a diet, right?
Sure.
You cut out the carbs, you force yourself to skip dessert, maybe you get a little grumpy around 4 in the afternoon when your blood sugar dips, you get, hangry.
Hangry is a very, very mild term for what happened to Pumpkin.
Right, because Pumpkin didn't just get a little grumpy. He underwent a complete, terrifying personality transplant.
It was immediate. And it was drastic.
Yeah.
The guy who was the life of the party, he disappeared completely. The charming guy at the glass, gone. Pumpkin became incredibly mean. He became aggressive towards the staff. But what's even more interesting, purely from a biological standpoint, is that he lost all of that quote-unquote civilization we just talked about.
The art, the painting.
Gone. He absolutely refused to paint. In fact, he took his art supplies and he ate his crayons.
He ate the wax crayons.
Yes, because he was so desperate for calories. Any calories he could find, even wax.
Wow.
And the sign language. He completely stopped signing. The only time he would use his 150-word vocabulary was if it was to aggressively demand food. He wasn't interested in chatting or making jokes with the keepers anymore. His entire vast cognitive capacity narrowed down to one singular blinding focus: feed me.
And then there was the protest behavior, the really nasty stuff.
Yes, the fecal throwing.
Which, I mean, it's funny in a gross middle school kind of way, but when you actually think about it, for a creature that primatologists previously described as having inherent dignity, that is a massive, profound degradation of his character.
It really is. But I want to pause here for a second because this is a crucial concept for the listener to understand.
Okay.
We look at Pumpkin throwing poop at his keepers and eating his crayons, and we apply our human lens to it. We think, oh, he's throwing a tantrum. He's acting out because he's not getting his way.
Right, like a toddler.
Exactly. But biologically, something much more profound and ancient is happening inside his body. His brain has entered an absolute panic state.
Just because of the zoo diet.
Because of the caloric restriction. You have to remember the context of the animal.
Right.
Pumpkin does not know what a zoo is.
Right.
He doesn't know what a diet is or what calories are. He certainly doesn't know that these humans in the khaki shirts are actually trying to save his life from respiratory failure.
Yeah.
All his ancient biology knows is that for years and years, the calories were flowing abundantly. And now suddenly, without warning, they have stopped.
So his body thinks the world has literally ended.
His body thinks he has entered a catastrophic famine. And for a primate, a famine is the ultimate life or death emergency. So his biological imperative violently kicks in and sends a signal to his brain saying, shut down all non-essential systems right now.
Wow. So painting pictures.
Non-essential.
Socializing with the keepers.
Non-essential.
Basic dignity.
Completely non-essential. The only thing that matters in a famine is energy acquisition. Finding food.
So he wasn't actually being a jerk, he was being a survivor.
Exactly. His biology was completely hijacking his behavior to save him from a starvation event that wasn't actually happening in reality.
But the thing is, Pumpkin wasn't content to just sit there in his enclosure and starve. He was smart, remember, we established that. And a hungry, smart, 500-pound ape is a very, very dangerous thing.
Which perfectly leads us to the climax of his story, the Great Escape.
I honestly love this part of the source material so much. It reads like Ocean's 11 meets King Kong.
It really does have that cinematic quality. So one day, Pumpkin manages to break out of his enclosure. And the source doesn't give us the exact step-by-step details on how he managed it, but suddenly the alarm goes off. He is loose on the grounds. And the zookeepers go into a full-blown absolute panic mode.
I mean, reasonably so.
Because, again, we are talking about a 500-pound orangutan. Even an obese one is incredibly, terrifyingly strong compared to a human.
Right. The source actually mentions they were actively worried he might try to hijack and drive a car.
I know it sounds completely absurd to picture an orangutan driving a golf cart or a truck, but orangutans are master mimics. They sit there and watch us all day. They understand how levers and steering wheels work. And Pumpkin easily has the physical strength to just rip a car door clean off its hinges. If he decided to get into a service vehicle and step on the gas, who knows what would have happened.
So the alarms are blaring. They are locking down the entire zoo. The staff is running around checking all the utility closets. They're searching the woods around the perimeter. They're even climbing up to check the roof of the buildings. They are terrified this massive ape is going to run into a family of tourists or end up hurting himself. But they cannot find him anywhere.
And finally, amidst all this chaos, one of the head keepers stops and realizes they're going about this search all wrong.
Yeah.
They're thinking like rational humans trying to hide. They need to stop and think like an orangutan. And not just any orangutan. Specifically, an obese, starving, highly motivated orangutan.
All right, so you have to ask yourself the question, if I'm a 500-pound ape and my brain is absolutely convinced that I am currently starving to death in a famine, where is the very first place I'm going to go?
I am certainly not going to climb up to the hot roof. And I'm not going to wander out into the woods to slowly forage for tiny little berries.
No, I'm going straight to the kitchen.
I am going directly to the source of the calories.
And that is exactly where they found him, hiding out in the zoo's main prep kitchen. And the scene the author describes when they open that door, it's visceral. It's not just a cute monkey eating a stolen banana.
No, not at all. He had found the absolute mother lode. He found a 55-gallon drum of what they call monkey chow. This is the industrial, highly dry, incredibly nutrient-dense kibble that they formulate specifically to feed the primate population.
A 55-gallon drum, that is the size of an industrial oil drum.
Yes. And he had managed to tip this massive drum completely over on its side. And the author's description here is so evocative. It says he was using, quote, all four hands, unquote. Because you have to remember, an orangutan's feet are essentially just another pair of hands.
Right. Highly prehensile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he is using all four hands to frantically shovel this dry chow into his mouth as fast as physically possible.
Just this absolute frantic whirlwind of consumption.
He wasn't chewing his food. He wasn't savoring it. He was just inhaling it. He was gorging in the truest sense of the word.
And when the staff finally caught him and had to bring him back, it wasn't a pretty scene.
It was the exact opposite of that wild dignity we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They had to heavily sedate him just to handle him safely.
Yeah.
And then they had to bring in a hose and literally hose him down on the floor because he was just covered head to toe in crushed up chow and drool and filth from the kitchen.
Oh.
And then, because he was so heavy, they had to physically drag his unconscious body all the way back to his enclosure. And the author leaves us with this incredibly evocative, heartbreaking line. He describes the sound of Pumpkin's, quote, folds of orange flab squeaking across the tile floor, unquote.
God, that is just such a depressing sound to imagine. Squeaking flab.
It is deeply tragic. But, and here's the major pivot of our discussion today, why are we spending so much time telling this specific story? Is the source just trying to get us to laugh at the fat monkey?
Definitely not.
No. The author is brilliantly using Pumpkin's tragedy to clearly illustrate the fundamental underlying biological divide that actually explains your late-night ship habit.
Right. It illustrates the grand divide between the gorgers and the hoarders.
Correct. When you look at the grand scheme of mammalian evolution, there are really two main divergent strategies to handle the constant pressing problem of finding and storing food energy. You are wired to either be a gorger, exactly like Pumpkin, or you are wired to be a hoarder.
Okay, let's really break this concept down for everyone, because this is the crux of it. What exactly defines the difference between the two? Is it just a personality quirk of the animal?
Not at all. It is entirely dictated by the environment they evolved in, but specifically it comes down to one single variable: the perishability of their primary food source.
Perishability. Does your food rot?
Exactly. Let's look at the gorger strategy first, because this is our team. This is us. Humans, chimpanzees, orangutans, lions, wolves, we are all gorgers. And the source asks us to do a little mental time travel. Go all the way back to the Pleistocene savanna. Imagine that you are an early human hunter-gatherer.
Okay, I'm there. I'm in my loincloth. I've got my pointy spear.
Perfect. So you and your little tribe of early humans have just managed, against all odds, to take down a massive prey animal. The source refers to it as a short-necked giraffe.
Sounds delicious.
It's a massive, unprecedented payout of fresh meat and fat, hundreds of thousands of calories just laying there in the grass. But look closely at your environmental context. You are in ancient Africa. It is over 100 degrees in the shade. The sun is just absolutely blazing down on you.
Oh, and the flies.
The flies are already swarming. They're landing on the carcass before you've even started skinning it.
And I'm assuming we're not alone out there. The hyenas are probably laughing in the distance.
The scavengers are definitely coming. They smell the blood. And here is the critical limitation. You have no refrigeration.
Right.
You don't have salt to cure and dry the meat. You certainly don't have Tupperware to pack up the leftovers.
So the shelf life on this giant windfall of meat is what, a day?
Maybe 2 days, if you're lucky, before the bacteria makes it completely toxic to consume.
Mm.
So you are staring at millions of calories sitting right in front of you, but they are essentially evaporating into the heat hour by hour. You have a massive, unbelievable surplus right now in this exact moment, but you have absolutely no idea when you're going to eat a full meal again.
Right, because hunting is hard.
The next successful kill might be a week away. It might be 2 weeks. You might have to forage for bitter roots until then.
So logically, what is the survival strategy there?
You have to move that volatile energy from the dangerous external environment into a safe, secure storage facility immediately. And the only viable storage facility you possess is your own body.
You just have to eat it, all of it.
You eat as much as you physically, anatomically can. You gorge. You stuff yourself until you feel physically sick. You push way, way past the point of feeling, quote-unquote, full.
Because stopping when you're full is a luxury.
Exactly. because every single calorie you manage to swallow is a calorie that the hyenas don't get to steal, and it's a calorie that your digestive system will convert into body fat.
And that body fat is basically the human battery pack.
That is exactly what it is. Fat is simply stored energy waiting for the inevitable future famine. In this brutal Pleistocene context, having the physical capacity to sit down and eat 5,000 calories in one single sitting isn't gluttony.
It's not a sin.
No, it is a massive survival superpower. Think about it. If you were the polite hunter who stopped eating just because you felt comfortably full, you would likely starve to death next week when the food ran out.
So, by definition, we are the descendants of the absolute best eaters on the savannah, the ones who could gorge the hardest, who could pack on the most fat the fastest. Those were the ones who lived long enough to pass on their genes to us.
Precisely. We are the genetic champions of the buffet. That is our heritage.
Okay, so that perfectly explains Team Gorger, Team Pumpkin. Now, who is playing for the other team? Who are the hoarders of the animal kingdom?
The ultimate poster child for the hoarder strategy is the humble squirrel.
The squirrel! The little frantic guys running around my local park.
Yes. The author actually calls the squirrel the, quote, patron saint of frugality, unquote. And to understand why, you just have to think about what squirrels primarily eat.
Nuts. Acorns. Seeds.
And what is the single defining biological characteristic of a nut?
Well, it has a really hard shell. It's dry.
Crucially, it does not rot. A nut is essentially non-perishable. A squirrel can take an acorn, bury it deep in the damp ground, leave it there for 6 entire months through freezing snow and ice, and then dig it back up in late February, and it is still perfectly good to eat. It retains its caloric value.
Wow. So the fundamental logic of their survival completely flips.
It inverts entirely. If your food source is naturally stable and weather-resistant, why in the world would you ever carry that heavy energy around on your own body?
Right.
Why would you get fat? Fat is incredibly heavy. It requires extra energy just to move it around. It makes you sluggish. It makes you noticeably slower when a hawk swoops down to try and eat you.
So if I can safely store my food in a hole in the ground, I definitely don't need to store it on my waistline.
Exactly. So the squirrel wisely outsources its energy storage. It essentially creates a massive decentralized savings account spread all across the backyard. And the source points out a really amazing statistic. Squirrels are incredibly diligent investors. They successfully recover something like over 80% of the individual nuts they bury.
I mean, that is a significantly better return rate than my 401k right now.
It's remarkably efficient. And because they utilize this external storage system, the squirrel's physical body can remain incredibly lean all year round. The author actually shares it's a bit of a graphic, highly personal anecdote at this point in the text. To prove his point, he mentions that he actually went out, hunted, and ate a wild squirrel.
Yeah, I saw that part. I think the quote was shot, skinned, cooked, and devoured. He is really, really committing to the investigative bit here.
He really is putting his money where his mouth is. But he notes something physically important from that experience. He says he was totally amazed at how dense and tough the squirrel meat was. He explicitly notes that there was, quote, not 1 gram of fat, unquote, on the animal.
So the squirrel is essentially the elite CrossFit athlete of the animal kingdom. Pure lean muscle.
Because they simply don't need the internal fat layer. They have the external nuts. So if we want to use a really clear financial analogy here to sum it up, the squirrel is the conservative, highly responsible Wall Street banker. He has tangible assets. He has a widely diversified portfolio, safely buried in the earth. He remains highly liquid.
Okay, I like this analogy. So what does that make the human?
The human, or the orangutan, is the erratic guy who cashes his entire physical paycheck the exact second he gets it on side A and immediately goes out and buys heavy gold chains to wear around his neck.
Right, because he lives in a really rough neighborhood where he thinks the bank itself might get robbed at any moment, so he keeps his wealth on him.
Exactly. We carry our biological wealth directly on our bodies because we evolved in a highly volatile world where you absolutely could not trust the environment to save it for you. One strategy stores capital, the nuts. The other strategy stores equity, the blubber.
That is just such a helpful visual way to understand it. Honestly, it makes me feel a little less like a hopeless slob and a little more like a distressed asset manager.
Huh, Exactly. You're a high-risk hedge fund manager operating in a chronically volatile biological market.
I really love that framing. And of course, there's always a perma, but in these evolutionary stories, even the perfect, disciplined banker can apparently be corrupted.
Ah, yes. This is where the narrative gets really fascinating and honestly a little deeply disturbing. We have firmly established that squirrels are genetically, evolutionarily programmed for absolute temperance. They're the ultimate hoarders. They simply shouldn't get fat. It goes against everything they are.
Right, it's a violation of their biological code.
But the author asks a compelling question. What actually happens if you take that highly disciplined, incredibly lean hoarder and you drop him right into the absolute epicenter of modern American tourism?
You get the Grand Canyon.
Yes, the Grand Canyon,
Yeah.
which the text beautifully describes as the, quote, Cathedral of the Titans, unquote. It's this ancient, majestic, almost spiritual landscape. And apparently it is also home to what the author dubs the kamikaze squirrel.
The kamikaze squirrel. And just from the source's description, these guys are definitely not the lean, muscular CrossFit squirrels that the author cooked and ate.
Not even close. These specific Grand Canyon squirrels are described as operating in, quote, roving gangs. They are visibly obese. They actually have double chins. They are literally salivating at the tourists. And they have completely, totally lost their natural instinctual fear of human beings.
They aren't just sitting up and cutely begging for crumbs. They are actively mugging people.
They are aggressively jumping into open backpacks. They're snapping their teeth at people's fingers. The author vividly describes watching them actively diving to steal dropped chicken McNuggets.
So the author, being the inquisitive guy he is, decides to run a little impromptu field experiment, a taste test for the squirrels.
Right. He wants to see if their ancient biological programming is still functioning in there somewhere. So he tosses a handful of standard trail mix right at them. Now, keep in mind, trail mix is mostly nuts. And nuts are the squirrels' evolutionary perfect native food. It is exactly what their bodies are designed to seek out and hoard.
But it's trail mix, so there's other stuff mixed in there too.
There are M&Ms.
The brightly colored candy, the
Yeah.
blue ones, the red ones.
And what do you think the squirrels do? Do they act like the highly responsible, frugal hoarders they were born to be and quickly gather up the healthy nuts to bury for the coming winter? Nope. They completely ignore the nuts. They step right over them and go straight for the milk chocolate candy.
And the French fries. There is this completely absurd yet totally heartbreaking visual image in the text of a visibly fat squirrel waddling away, literally waddling, not darting or running like a normal squirrel with a limp, greasy French fry hanging out of its mouth.
I mean, it's a funny cartoon image, but when you actually stop to analyze the science behind it, it's actually incredibly terrifying.
It is deeply terrifying.
Yeah.
Because it definitively proves that quote-unquote civilization, or rather, our highly engineered modern industrial food supply, is potent enough to completely break and override millions of years of rock-solid evolutionary coding.
Even the ultimate hoarder can be instantly corrupted by junk food. Think about the actual physiological choice that specific squirrel is making on the pavement. On one hand, you have the natural nut. It's lipid-dense, it's protein-rich, it has a hard protective shell, it is objectively good, healthy food for a squirrel. But on the other hand, you have the chocolate candy or the deep-fried potato. These are what scientists call hyperpalatable foods.
Right.
They are artificially engineered in laboratories to be as delicious and addictive as physically possible. They are essentially pre-digested energy. It's pure sugar, pure fat, huge ounces of salt, absolutely no fiber, and no shell to slow you down.
It's just free instant energy.
It acts as a superstimulus. The sugar from the candy hits the squirrel's tiny brain exactly like a hard drug. It violently overrides the natural hoard command, and it forcibly triggers the ancient gorge command. It completely hacks their operating software.
Okay, so if a squirrel, an animal who is essentially the disciplined monk of the entire animal kingdom, cannot resist the siren song of a greasy French fry, what realistic chance do I have? I'm a natural gorger. I am literally programmed down to my DNA to scream yes to the massive calorie bomb.
And there it is. That is the absolute crux of the modern human predicament. We are not just corrupted squirrels who lost our way. We are fully unleashed pumpkins.
We are pumpkin in the zoo kitchen.
We are pumpkin loose in the kitchen. And this realization brings us to the grand synthesis of this entire deep dive. Based on all of this evidence, the source makes a very bold claim. It argues that the modern epidemic of obesity was, in effect, quote, invented by civilization, unquote.
Because we systematically built a daily environment that fundamentally does not match our biological blueprint.
Look closely at the sheer metabolic efficiency of the human body. We are incredibly, astonishingly good at not dying. The source actually throws out a really fascinating kind of morbid data point here. If you were to cut off a human's food supply, completely put them in absolute zero-calorie famine conditions, how long do you think it generally takes an average human adult to actually starve to death?
Wow. I mean, if I miss lunch, I feel like I'm dying, so I would have guessed, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks tops.
2 full months.
2 months, 60 days with absolutely no food.
Roughly 60 days, yes. And for the, quote, super plump, unquote, individuals, as the text rather politely refers to them, it can easily take 3 full months or even much longer to succumb to starvation. Now, put that fact back into the Pleistocene savanna context. That ability was an absolute superpower. That was the defining difference between total genetic extinction and survival. If a brutal, freezing winter hit the tribe, the lean, ripped guy with zero body fat died in early January. The guy with the quote-unquote love handles. He slowly burned that equity, made it all the way to March, and lived to see the spring thaw.
So historically speaking, being super plump was actually the ultimate evolutionary flex. It physically meant you were unkillable.
It meant you were the ultimate survival machine. But now, look at the reality of our current world. We still have that incredibly strong gorge instinct driving our behavior, that desperate, panic-induced drive to eat, as if a deadly famine is guaranteed to arrive next week. But the trick is, the famine never, ever comes.
The 55-gallon drum in the kitchen never actually runs empty.
The supermarket down the street is always perfectly stocked. The drive-through window is open 24 hours a day. And crucially, this is the biggest shift. We don't even have to physically work for the calories anymore. Think about Pumpkin. Even in his captive environment, he still had to physically break out of a steel cage, evade capture, and use his massive primate strength to tip over a heavy oil drum. We don't have to do any of that. We literally just tap a piece of glass on our phone a few times, and a total stranger drives a hot pizza directly to our front door.
I mean, we honestly don't even have to put on pants to get 5,000 calories delivered.
Exactly. We've completely, fundamentally decoupled the act of energy acquisition from the act of energy expenditure.
The source makes a really sharp, kind of biting observation about the human tourists at the Grand Canyon to highlight this. We talked about how the squirrels changed, but the people were actively mirroring them.
Yes. The author notes a very stark, visible contrast in the human populations there. Down deep inside the canyon, navigating the rugged, grueling trails, you see what he calls the Uber hikers. These are the highly active people fueling themselves by eating space-age astronaut foods squeezed out of aluminum tubes, and they all look incredibly lean, wiry, and fit. But when you look up on the paved rim, hanging out at the tourist visitor centers,
The quote is portly, gasping, stopping every half mile to consume Happy Meals.
it is a very harsh, unflinching reflection. The author even dryly notes that the obese squirrels themselves seemed uniquely, quote, American, unquote. It's a poignant commentary on how our engineered environment completely shapes our physical reality. We're all humans and squirrels alike, falling victim to the relentless abundance of easy, ultra-processed energy.
So let's bring this all the way back to that opening moment we talked about, the midnight guilt, sitting on the couch with the empty bag of Doritos.
Yes, let's return to the witching hour.
When I eat that entire bag, the overwhelming feeling is that I just lost a major battle with myself. But based on everything we just discussed, you're actually saying I technically won a battle.
In the strict context of your deep evolutionary programming, yes, you absolutely won. When you devour that bag of Doritos, your ancient, primitive brain is throwing a massive parade in your honor. It is screaming out, success! We have successfully located a wildly dense source of essential salt, highly caloric fat, and easy carbohydrates. We have hit the absolute biological jackpot. Eat every single bite of it right now before the scavenger hyenas show up to steal it. Store all this precious energy for the coming winter.
So my brain genuinely thinks I am just this absolute genius, top-tier hunter-gatherer who just secured the tribe's future.
Your brain thinks you just single-handedly took down the biggest short-necked giraffe on the entire savannah. And it's chemically rewarding you for that heroic effort with massive hits of dopamine. It is patting you on the back saying, good job, buddy, you are definitely going to survive the next ice age.
Meanwhile, in reality, I am just sitting motionless on a very comfortable couch watching a Netflix documentary.
And that profound disconnect is the central tragedy of the situation. You are just acting exactly like Pumpkin in the kitchen. And the source addresses this explicitly. It says, next time you feel that crushing guilt about your late-night binge, intentionally remember pumpkin. Eating that entire bag of Doritos suddenly doesn't seem quite so morally self-indulgent when you actively compare yourself to a 500-pound ape frantically shoveling handfuls of dry monkey chow into his mouth from a tipped-over drum.
Wow. It really does put it into a much kinder perspective. I'm not fundamentally broken as a person. I'm just incredibly, incredibly good at playing a survival game that society isn't actually playing anymore.
Exactly. To use another analogy, you are a high-performance Formula One race car that is being forced to try and commute through a 20-mile-per-hour school zone. You are brilliantly engineered for extreme speed and consumption, but your current environment strictly requires constant heavy braking.
Okay, so we've thoroughly covered the whole quote-unquote don't beat yourself up part of the mission, which I deeply appreciate, and I'm sure the listeners do too. But the source text doesn't actually just leave the narrative there. It hints toward the very end that there might actually be a much, much bigger evolutionary reason for all this human fat storage. It wasn't exclusively just about surviving the winter famine.
No, it wasn't. And this is the really provocative teaser the author drops towards the end of the text. The source suggests that we really need to change our perspective, look down at our, quote, rolling folds, unquote, our belly fat, our love handles, and genuinely thank them.
I need to explicitly thank my muffin top.
You really should. Because according to some fascinating evolutionary theories, without our unique, extreme ability to store excess fat, we might not even be human at all today.
Okay, you're going to have to explain the mechanics of that one.
It ties into what anthropologists call the expensive tissue hypothesis. Think about the modern human brain for a second. It is incredibly massive relative to our body size. It is immensely complex, and above all else, it is incredibly, relentlessly energy hungry. Your brain only accounts for roughly 2% of your total body weight, but it completely consumes 20% of all your metabolic energy when you are just sitting at rest.
So it's an absolute biological gas guzzler.
It is a massive supercomputer that runs incredibly hot 24/7. Now, purely from an evolutionary standpoint, to safely evolve a delicate organ that demands that much constant energy, you need an ironclad guarantee of daily caloric income. You simply cannot afford to have a brain that powers down or suffers damage every single time you miss a lunch out on the savannah. You need a highly reliable, massive capacity battery backup system to keep the biological lights on during the lean times.
And that battery is the fat.
Fat is exactly that battery. Our, quote, fat asses, unquote, as the source very colorfully phrases it, might have actually provided the crucial, required energetic safety net that safely allowed our brains to physically expand and develop over millions of years of evolution. The theory essentially argues that we had to get fat first so that we could eventually get smart.
That is a wildly validating theory. So you are telling me that my physiological ability to gain weight easily is actually the foundational evolutionary reason that I am capable of doing complex math. Or, well, maybe not complex math for me, but, capable of hosting a deep dive discussion.
In a very real evolutionary sense, yes.
Yeah.
Your big brain was paid for by your ancestors' blubber. And there's actually one more slightly cryptic comment the source makes right at the end. It casually mentions that having all this blubber also really came in handy when it was, quote, time to float, unquote.
Time to float. Is the author making a subtle reference to that horror movie, IT?
I highly doubt it. It's much more likely a passing nod to what's known as the aquatic ape hypothesis, or at least to the general evolutionary utility of physical buoyancy. Think about the physics. Fat naturally floats in water. Dense muscle naturally sinks like a stone. If our early ancestors spent any significant amount of their evolutionary time living in or near deep water, say, wading through rivers, or foraging for shellfish in coastal deltas, having that built-in natural buoyancy would have been a massive daily survival advantage. It would prevent drowning and conserve swimming energy.
So the fat isn't just dead, useless weight holding us back. It's actually high-grade brain fuel, and it doubles as a built-in life jacket.
It is quite literally the foundational biological infrastructure of modern humanity.
Well, this has certainly been a journal today. I feel like we've gone all the way from intense self-loathing alone in the dark kitchen to mentally high-fiving our ancient ancestors out on the sun-baked savannah.
It is definitely a lot of paradigm-shifting information to process all at once.
So let's try to step back and just look at the really big picture here before we wrap up. We have firmly established, through biology and the pumpkin story, that we are gorgers. We are genetically designed and motivated to eat everything in sight. But we are currently living in an artificial calorie wonderland. We are essentially just pumpkin locked in the kitchen forever. The food drum is never, ever going to empty out.
That is the unavoidable reality of modern civilization.
So, what exactly do we do with this information? I mean, we obviously can't just abandon society, go live in the woods, and try to hunt short-necked giraffes with sharp sticks. We have to live right here in modern civilization. We still have to physically walk past the Doritos aisle in the grocery store every single week.
The ultimate takeaway from these sources, first and foremost, is radical self-acceptance. The author explicitly begins and ends the piece with the exact same simple plea to the reader. Don't beat yourself up.
Because shame is clearly not an effective long-term diet plan.
Shame is actually wildly counterproductive to health. From a physiological standpoint, intense feelings of shame and stress actively trigger the release of cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone. And do you know what cortisol physically signals your ancient body to do?
Let me guess. Store more fat.
Exactly. It signals that you are in a stressful, dangerous environment, so you better store more belly fat just in case. It creates a horrific, self-defeating, vicious cycle.
Oh, the painful irony of that.
Right. But by actually understanding your underlying biology, it allows you to finally separate your core personal self-worth from your daily eating habits. You aren't a, quote, bad person, unquote, simply for wanting to eat the chocolate cake. You are just being human. You are operating as a highly successful gorger.
And I think realizing that even the squirrels, the ultra-disciplined Wall Street bankers of nature, that even they can be instantly corrupted by a French fry, it really gives us a little necessary perspective. It proves it's not just a uniquely human failing, it's the engineered power of the food itself.
It is entirely the environment. And look, while we obviously cannot go in and rewrite our DNA, and we can't easily change the absolute fact that fully stocked 24-hour grocery stores exist on every corner, truly understanding the deep evolutionary why gives us a real fighting chance. It provides us with a crucial moment of pause before we act.
A sort of metacognition moment.
Exactly. When you are standing in the kitchen and you feel that overwhelming, frantic urge to binge, you can now logically recognize what is actually happening. You can take a breath and say, okay, that feeling is just my inner pumpkin reacting. He's panicking about a deadly winter famine that simply isn't coming.
You can actually talk back to the inner ape.
You can try to logically reason with it. You can literally tell yourself, I know you desperately want to eat this entire bag of chips right now because your programming thinks the ice is closing in. But winter isn't coming. We literally have a fully stocked fridge right next to us. We are safe.
Right. You can say, put down the wax crayons, pumpkin. We're going to be totally okay tonight.
Exactly. Now, is that mental trick always going to work perfectly? No, of course not. Ancient biological drives are incredibly, stubbornly powerful. But having that internal dialogue is miles better than just blindly hating yourself in the dark.
I really, really like that approach. It effectively turns what used to be a brutal internal war into more of a peaceful negotiation.
A daily negotiation with a very terrified, very hungry ancient ancestor who just wants to keep you alive.
So just to be totally clear, my shameful late-night snacking habit is actually a profound biological tribute to the elite survival skills that successfully kept my genetic lineage alive during the harshest periods of the Ice Age.
In a very real, scientifically accurate way, yes, it is. We are perfectly tuned survival machines trying to exist in a completely unnatural world of endless abundance. The ultimate challenge of the modern human experience is successfully navigating a life where the famine we are built for never actually arrives, which, to be fair, is a pretty fantastic, high-class problem to have, historically speaking.
That is very true. Given the choice, I would much, much rather have to figure out how to deal with the temptation of too many Doritos than have to actively fend off a pack of hungry hyenas for my dinner.
I think every single one of us would gladly make that same trade.
Well, this raises one final, really interesting question for you, the listener, to mull over after we finish up today. If our core biology is fundamentally designed to gorge without limit, and our modern environment is perfectly designed to feed us constantly and effortlessly, how exactly do we fight back against, quote, pumpkin mode, unquote, in our daily lives without just making ourselves miserable and hungry all the time? Is it genuinely possible to find a sustainable, healthy balance between our ancient gorger instincts and the realities of the modern world? Or are we just doomed to constantly struggle against the side effects of our own evolutionary success?
That truly is the defining public health question of our entire era.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the quirky, ancient biology of your own bodies. Next time you are out at a park or the Grand Canyon and you happen to see a squirrel, maybe take a second to check if he's responsibly eating a natural nut. or if he's hauling away a stolen French fry. It might actually tell you a whole lot about the complex, contradictory world we are all currently trying to live in.
Indeed it will.
Thanks for listening.